On the 10th of April 2001, 26-year-old Rebeca Pena worked in Miami as an extra in the movie Muhammad Ali, which featured Will Smith. She was last seen leaving the set in a white Honda Civic around 2:15 a.m, but this was the last time she was seen alive, and she was reported missing to the police. Investigators stated that she made it home from the set because the car was found at her apartment complex in Miramar. At the time of her disappearance, Pena had a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend, Berkeley Calvin Curtis Jr. Her father explained to police that Pena was afraid of Curtis because he'd been abusive in the past and even tried choking her in November of 1998, which required police intervention to stop him. She feared he would harm her and continued to stalk her. On the 16th of April 2001, 3 men travelling in a boat down the Biscayne River Canal in Miami discovered a suitcase. Inside was a woman's body that was stuffed into it, and the authorities were contacted. The body was identified to be that of Rebeca Pena. There were 2 25-pound weights that were used to sink her, as well as a magazine inside one of the pockets of the suitcase that had been marked to the attention of the Pena family and the home address in Silver Spring, Maryland, where she once lived with Curtis and their child. Police executed a search warrant at Curtis's home and found weightlifting equipment, including 25-pound weights, which matched the plates found inside the suitcase with her body. When Curtis's girlfriend, who also had a child with him, was originally interviewed by the authorities, she told them that she was home with her that night in their Miami apartment, and he had only left for 20 minutes to go to a store. She was interviewed again in 2014, and she changed her story, saying he was gone for a few hours, which would have put him at the perfect time of the crime. With further investigation, using forensics and modern-day detective techniques and technology, the case eventually became solved. On the 15th of December 2020, Curtis, who is now 45 years of age, was arrested and charged with taking Rebeca's life and is held without bond. Since it's still very early in the conviction process, police remained relatively tight-lipped in exactly what led to his arrest. However, it was said that the GPS records were among the evidence which was looked at, as well as all the testimonies over the years. State Attorney Catherine Fernandez Rundle credited new forensics and modern-day technology for helping move the case along. She explained, "We could go back and look at GPS records, for instance, and today we could see where people are moving around, so that was a huge asset for us." After learning of the news, Pena's father Raphael said, "The pain will be less because justice has been served, but the emptiness is still there and won't go away." On the 30th of November 1999, 30-year-old flight attendant, young Kavila, had just returned home from buying some food when she discovered a strange man waiting for her inside a tiny Chicago, Illinois apartment. He attacked her with a boot knife, and she desperately tried to fend him off. She was badly beaten, then slashed several times in the neck and stabbed dozens of times. During the violent struggle, he accidentally cut himself and received a large gaping wound across his chest, spilling his blood at the scene. He then proceeded to violate her, wiping his hands on the bed sheets, and exited the premises. A short time later, her lifeless body was found by her roommate as she entered their apartment. She was laying motionless in a pool of blood in the kitchen. The authorities were contacted. They arrived and collected evidence at the crime scene, including blood and fingerprints on the doorknob. Despite an extensive investigation, all leads were exhausted and the case went cold. In 2007, a man living in Mexico by the name of Luis Rodriguez Mina, who is now 46 years of age, became a suspect when he bragged to relatives about taking Kavila's life. He threatened revenge on anyone who notified the police about it. He was living in an apartment close to her at the time of the attack, but fled to Mexico the following day with his pregnant girlfriend. In 2008, Louise's girlfriend returned to Illinois with their son. A tip from a family member led police to Louise's son, and the mother permitted the authorities to take a DNA buccal swab. The DNA from the child was compared to the blood evidence that was collected from the crime scene, and it was a 99.98% match. The authorities said there were several things that came up over the years. There was the DNA evidence that linked him back to the case. There was bloodstains found in Kavila's bedding and shoe, as well as a fingerprint on the doorknob, which was also matched later in the separate case in Mexico. All these helped tie Rodriguez Mina to the crime, and a warrant for his arrest was issued. A big break in the case came when family members cooperated with the authorities and provided his whereabouts. In June of 2020, Luis was arrested in Mexico, where he fought extradition for months. Prior efforts by the FBI and Interpol to take the fugitive into custody proved difficult when he moved locations every time the authorities closed in on him. On the 8th of December 2020, Luis was extradited to the US and turned over to the Des Plaines Police Department, where he faces charges for taking Young's life. He's been held without bond, as determined by a judge on the 10th of December 2020. He's due back in court later this month. More than 2 decades after the attack, the authorities still couldn't offer a motive for the crime. On the 11th of February 2006, Amber Woods was a 16-year-old girl who was raised by her auntie and was last seen at their home along State Road 62 in Hardy County in Florida at 12:30 in the morning. She was discovered missing, and there was no signs of a struggle, and it was uncertain why she left. At 7:30 in the morning, Amber's lifeless body was discovered further down the same road by a driver. She'd been shot in the back and was about 20 feet from the side of the road, about 3 miles west of Hardy County Railway line. The motorist contacted the authorities, and evidence was collected from the crime scene. The sheriff's office had several leads to go on. One of the prime suspects was 20-year-old Ralph Williams. Investigators discovered that Woods and Williams were dating at the time, and she was believed to be pregnant with his child. The authorities retrieved a text message from his phone showing that he was concerned he would face criminal charges because Woods was underage. He didn't want to get found out and had conspired to kidnap her and slaughter her with the help of his brother, Taiwan Williams, and half-brother Jermaine Brown. An autopsy later revealed that Woods was not pregnant. The authorities conducted dozens of interviews. Williams denied ever being in the area of the crime at the time. However, there wasn't enough strong evidence to build a case to prosecute him, and the case went cold. Then in April of 2019, the authorities re-examined the case using sophisticated cellular tracking software technology that wasn't previously available back in 2006. It monitored the movements of Williams, his 2 brothers and Woods in the car through the use of pings from local cell towers to their phones. It showed that Williams was in the vicinity of Amber's body at the time she was shot. On the 20th of May 2020, detectives arrested Jermaine Brown and accused him of kidnapping Woods. In a recorded interview, detectives say Brown confessed to kidnapping Woods and driving her to a rural location along State Road 62 with his brothers. He said they all got out of the car, and Tuan shot her once in the back, and he and Ralph dragged her body off the road and into high grass before fleeing the scene. On the 15th of December 2020, 35-year-old Ralph Williams and 32-year-old Tuan Williams have been charged with maiming Woods. Both men were already in jail on unrelated charges in Polk and Hardy counties. They will remain at those facilities without bond until extradition. Brown pleaded guilty as an accessory to the crime and remains at the Manatee County Jail. Amber's sister-in-law Crystal Moses said, "As you all know, it's been a long time coming. We're ecstatic we have justice. I hope they rot in hell. That's the best way I can say it." On the 27th of December 1975, the authorities responded to a call from an apartment complex manager stating that a lifeless woman was found in one of the units located along Belford Avenue in Grand Junction, Colorado, after completing a welfare check on her. She gained entry to the locked apartment using a passkey at around 6 p.m. after she became concerned that repeated phone calls were not being answered and the bedroom window was left open and the toilet was left running. When the police arrived, they discovered the woman laying partially clothed in the bathtub that had been bound, violated and strangled. No weapons were used in the attack, but she had sustained a large gash to her forehead, showing signs that she fought hard for her life. The woman was identified to have been 19-year-old college student Deborah Tomlinson. Evidence was collected from the crime scene. Suspects were interviewed. However, despite an extensive investigation, no major leads were developed and the case went cold. In 2019, the cold case detectives reinvestigated the matter with fresh eyes, and in 2020, The authorities partnered with the DNA technology company Parabon. Using the DNA collected from Deborah's body and at the crime scene, they were able to run it through public ancestry websites, creating family trees and narrowing the search down to the unknown attacker. Through police work, authorities identified Jimmy Dean Duncan as a suspect. Detectives obtained DNA from Jimmy's brother with his consent and compared it to the DNA found at the crime scene, and a match was made. The authorities confirmed without a doubt that Jimmy Duncan was responsible for taking Deborah's life. Duncan was a 26-year-old resident at the time of the crime and passed away in 1987. He wasn't previously on the radar, and there was no known connection between him or Deborah. Investigators, however, found that he had a family member who lived close to the college that Deborah attended. Therefore, it's believed he visited this relative, and that's how he could have possibly encountered her. The Grand Junction Police Department is still investigating a possible motive in the case, though Duncan did have a criminal history. He had previously been involved in a robbery and a separate shooting in Florida. The discovery gives Deborah's family some long-awaited closure. Her father, Jim Tomlinson, described Deborah as an outgoing kid. He said she loved horses, was a good student in school, and enjoyed being around people. After learning of the identity of the attacker, he said it took a lot of weight off his mind. He said he still didn't know why, but at least he knew who. "I'm really glad to hear they finally got it done," he said. "I called the rest of the family and told them. Everyone was glad to hear that the case has finally been solved." Ronda Blaylock was a 14-year-old 9th grader at Atkins High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. On the 26th of August 1980, she went to a bowling alley in Rural Hall with a friend. Afterwards, they started walking back home when she was approached by a stranger in a blue pickup truck who offered them a ride home. They both accepted and got into the vehicle. Ronda's friend was safely dropped off, but Ronda never made it home. Witnesses described the man to be a white male in his early to mid-20s. He said his name was Jimmy, but his friends called him Butch. He had brown hair with light facial hair. He was approximately 5 foot 9 inches to 6 feet tall and was of medium build. He smoked Winston cigarettes and wore a baseball cap and mirrored sunglasses. Her concerned parents reported her missing to the authorities that same night, and an extensive search began for her. 3 days later, her lifeless, partially clothed body was discovered in a heavily wooded area near a barn along Groundhog Trail in Pilot Mountain, which was approximately 18 miles from where she was last seen. She had been violated, viciously stabbed several times to the body, face and throat. Evidence was collected at the crime scene, but despite the best efforts of investigators at the time, the case went cold. Ronda's mother, Rebecca, approached the authorities in 2015, asking what progress had been made on her daughter's case. It was this inquiry that resulted in a special task force being formed. It comprised of current and past officers who were assigned to look deeper into the matter in an effort to solve it. People who were previously interviewed were tracked down all over the country. They were re-interviewed, and the task force would meet and decide on the next course of action. Some witnesses who were quite young at the time were able to provide better accounts of what happened, despite it being decades later, since they didn't fear of getting into trouble with their parents. Applying modern DNA technology techniques to the well-preserved evidence collected from the crime scene, along with witness accounts and circumstantial evidence, led to an arrest. On the 2nd of August 2019, Robert James Adkins of Dobson was charged for taking Ronda's life. The arrest took place exactly 1 year after Ronda's mother passed away. In a video provided by the authorities in 2015, Rebecca said, "Whoever was responsible for taking her daughter's life, she wanted them to spend the rest of their life in prison. I've been in prison, so to speak, for 35 years, she said in the video. I want them to know how it feels not to have your freedom." On the 17th of December 2020, in Adkins' final court appearance, the now 64-year-old pleaded guilty to indecently assaulting and taking Ronda's life. He'll spend at least the next 21 years behind bars. At 10 a.m. on Saturday the 19th of November 1988, Michaela Garecht was a 9-year-old girl and Hayward, California resident. She left home with her best friend Katrina Rodriguez and rode their scooters to a local supermarket called Rainbow Market along Mission Boulevard to purchase some snacks and soda, which she did on a daily basis. They arrived at 10:15 a.m. and placed their scooters next to the entrance and went inside. After exiting the store with their purchases, they realised that Michaela's scooter was missing, and they split up looking for it. Katrina pointed out that it was laying at the back of a parking lot near a car. As Michaela went over to collect it by its handlebars, a strange man got out of his vehicle. He opened the car door and put his right arm around her waist and pulled her away from the scooter. As he did, she started violently screaming, and he shoved her into the car before taking off with her. Katrina looked around after hearing the screams and was in shock and rushed back to the store, and a female shop assistant contacted the authorities. The police arrived and evidence was collected from the crime scene. Witnesses were questioned and a composite image was completed. The police determined that the offender strategically placed a scooter next to his vehicle, isolating her, thereby making it easier to abduct her. The man was described as a white male and was around his early to mid-20s and about 6 feet tall with slender build and dirty blonde shoulder-length hair. He had blue eyes, a pimpled face, and was wearing a white t-shirt. The vehicle he was driving was a large older American four-door sedan, which was in poor condition and was gold or tan in colour. The car had cement splatters on the sides and lights set into the rear bumper. The front bumper was damaged and looked like it had previously been involved in an accident. At the time of the kidnapping, Michaela was wearing a white t-shirt with the word Metro on the front, denim jeans rolled over her knees, black shoes, and pearl-coloured feather-shaped earrings. A number of suspects were identified over the years. However, after an extensive investigation and false leads, the case went cold. On the 21st of December 2020, the Hayward Police, in conjunction with the FBI, announced that 59-year-old David Emery Mish had been charged with abducting and slaughtering Michaela. He had a violent criminal history and is currently in prison serving time in the Santa Rita jail for stabbing the life out of 36-year-old Margaret Bull in 1989. He's also awaiting trial for the 1986 stabbing and shooting of 18-year-old Michelle Xavier and 20-year-old Jennifer Dewey in Fremont, where DNA linked him back to the attacks. Mish was identified to Michaela's case after a partial palm print was matched to him. He had been on a list of potential suspects, which was given to the Hayward fingerprint examiner, who was tasked with comparing the suspect's prints to that on the scooter. Witness accounts also placed Mish in the area of the market at the time of the abduction, and he was 27 years of age at the time. He also closely matched the physical description of the abductor given to police. The authorities concluded from the investigation that Mish maimed Michaela and hid her remains. Whether they are found will depend on the information they get from Mish. Her mother, Sharon Murch, has come to accept that she probably is no longer alive. 24-year-old Woodland, Washington, D.C. resident and mother of two, Unique Harris, was planning to go to college to pursue a career in massage therapy. At 10 o'clock at night, she finished watching a movie in her apartment with her 3 and 4-year-old sons and their 10-year-old cousin and put them to bed. When the children woke up in the morning, the place was in complete disarray and Harris was nowhere to be seen. She was reported missing to the police and an extensive search began for her. A prime suspect in her disappearance was a man by the name of Isaac Moy. He's now aged 43. He was interviewed several times over the years of 2011, 2016 and 2018. It was noted that he had been wearing a GPS tracking device at the time, and the authorities were able to determine that he was continuously present at Harris's apartment building the night she vanished. It showed that he exited the apartment complex at 7:20 a.m. on the 10th of October, and he walked back to a wooded area near his home. Phone records also show that he and Harris spoke 13 times on the day before she disappeared. Moy also has a criminal history that includes assault with a dangerous weapon, fugitive from justice, simple assault, and distribution of illicit substances. On the second anniversary of Harris's disappearance, her mother Valencia Harris urged anyone with information on her daughter to come forward so it might help generate leads for investigators. In 2017, the matter was looked into with a fresh set of eyes when a new detective was assigned to the case. Witnesses and suspects were re-interviewed and evidence from the crime scene was re-investigated. Harris's then 4-year-old son placed him at the scene, telling the new detective that he thought he had seen Moy at the apartment that night. He explained to the investigators that he heard arguing and a muffled scream before she disappeared that night. That same year, investigators were able to link Moy's DNA that was found on a couch cushion that had been in Harris's apartment. In 2018, despite being unable to locate a body, Harris was officially declared deceased. In 2020, a witness in custody who had previously spent time behind bars with Moy said he told him about a missing girl and recalled him saying that he would never be caught because he did it the right way, so they will never figure it out. Then on the 19th of December 2020, after an arrest warrant was issued, members of the Fugitive Task Force were able to track down Moy and placed him in custody and charged him with taking Unique Harris's life. Lorette Turner, the boy's paternal grandmother, who raised the children since, said it's been a long hard road. In the days since Moy's arrest, Valencia Harris posted on Facebook that she's been overwhelmed. I hope and pray every parent out there can rest a bit easier now that this deviant, diabolical vulture is off the damn streets. My child's life and passing will not be in vain, she wrote. The investigators were tight-lipped about the motive of the attack, as it's in its early stage of arrest. He pleaded not guilty to his first court appearance on the 21st of December 2020, and will make his next appearance on the 11th of January 2021. On the 15th of April 1999, at around 4 a.m, two women who lived in a Park Avenue residence of Summerdale, New Jersey, were attacked in their home while they were sleeping in bed as a man broke through the back door. The first woman, who was in a separate room, was abruptly awoken to a man holding a knife to her throat and demanded money. The man then subsequently bound, violated and stabbed the second woman multiple times. When he fled the scene, the first woman tried calling 911 but discovered that the phone lines had been cut. She ran to a neighbour's house for help, and the police arrived shortly thereafter. Miraculously, both women survived the horrendous ordeal. DNA was collected from the second victim, but a suspect was unable to be identified at the time, and the case went cold. In October 2019, investigators reopened the case and entered the same DNA collected in 1999 through the CODIS database, and they received a match. It identified 47-year-old Summerville, South Carolina resident Sanyika Adams as a suspect. As a result of further investigation, including meeting with the victims and locating Adams, detectives travelled approximately 700 miles to Summerville to interview him and collect a more recent DNA sample for analysis. On the 25th of November 2020, the crime lab confirmed that Adams' DNA was a match to the crime scene. It was confirmed he was living in Lawnside in New Jersey at the time of the crime. Adams was arrested at his home and was taken into custody on the 4th of December 2020 in South Carolina, and he's waiting extradition to New Jersey. He faces up to 19 charges against him, including attempting to take a life, aggravated assault and burglary. On the 11th of April 1992, a man was walking his dog next to the Mississippi River when he spotted a garbage bag floating along its banks, located just off 17th Street in Moline, Illinois. He was able to retrieve the bag and open it, only to discover a lifeless newborn female baby inside. He contacted the authorities and an extensive investigation was undertaken. Evidence was collected at the scene, but leads were exhausted at the time and the case went cold. The autopsy revealed that the baby passed away due to asphyxiation and hypothermia. The baby became known as Baby April, and she was buried a few days later at the Riverside Cemetery in Moline. The case was revisited in 2013, and all leads were reinvestigated. As technology advanced over the years, a DNA profile of the mother was created from the DNA found at the scene. However, the mother's identity and location remained unknown. There was sufficient evidence under Illinois law to obtain an arrest warrant on the 15th of December 2014 for a person with the same biological information on the DNA profile that was entered into the statewide database. The Moline Police submitted an expanded budget funding request for cold case investigations in November of 2019, which was granted from the City Council for the financial year of 2020. The authorities then partnered with the DNA technology company Parabon to try and solve the matter. In January of 2020, the investigators sent a DNA sample to Parabon and a DNA analysis was conducted. In April of 2020, Parabon were able to produce a snapshot DNA report of what the mother looked like, generating new leads in the case. On the 1st of December 2020, Parabon were able to link the DNA from the remains to relatives using genetic genealogy. They used publicly available ancestry websites and created family trees before narrowing it down and identifying 47-year-old Angela Sebke as a suspect. A search warrant to collect her DNA was issued, and police were able to travel to her home in Whitehall, Ohio, where she was living with her long-term boyfriend and children. They collected a buccal swab from her, which was later found to match the unknown DNA profile on file. In 1992, she lived in Orion, Illinois. On the 17th of December 2020, she was tracked down and arrested at a home of a family member in Rock Island, Illinois, and was charged with taking baby April's life. She was 18 years old at the time of the offence. In her first court appearance on the 29th of December, she pleaded not guilty and will appear back in court on the 22nd of January 2021. She's been held in the Rock Island County Jail on a $1 million bond. Merlin Detective Mike Griffin said, "I've never heard of the name Angela Sebke until a month ago. Looking to what she was doing throughout the years up until present day, I can tell you that Angela's never been arrested before. There's no criminal history, no prior contacts with us. Her name was not part of the investigation prior to a month ago, so she's led a largely clean life since then." Kimberly Ratliff was a 22-year-old woman who lived with her mum Joyce Kennedy and stepdad Les Kennedy in Council Bluffs, Iowa. She graduated from high school in 1995 and then started a paralegal course at Nebraska College, but dropped out a year later. At around 11:30 on a Friday night, on the 8th of January 1999, she left work from Airlight Plastics Company, located in Omaha, Nebraska. Her mother and her stepbrother Matt Kennedy both worked there at the time as well. This was the last time Kim was seen alive. At 10:40 in the morning on the 12th of January 1999, a gas employee was clearing snow off a sidewalk when he discovered Kim's mutilated and lifeless body inside a white car. She had sustained multiple cuts, and her body was sprawled across the front seat of the car, and her throat had been slashed so severely that she was almost decapitated. The authorities were contacted, and an extensive investigation began. Evidence was collected from the crime scene, and it was determined that Kimberly's life was taken outside her vehicle, and there were only small traces of blood in the car, considering the horrific attack. The vicious degree of the attack seemed to be personal in nature. The police interviewed people and had a prime suspect in mind, but they didn't have enough evidence at the time to hold up in court to make a successful conviction, so no arrests were made. In 2014, due to the advancements in DNA technology, evidence that was originally collected from the crime scene was submitted to the Iowa State Crime Lab for DNA analysis. It wasn't until 2017 that the lab then notified the investigators that an unknown male DNA profile was discovered on one of the items that was of a personal nature to Kim, that only she and the suspect would have been in contact with. With this information at hand, the authorities attempted to identify the DNA by comparing it to known profiles of individuals who have had access to Kimberly during the 4 to 6 hour window they believe the incident occurred. The last known person to see Kim alive was her stepbrother Matt Kennedy. In late August 2020, known DNA samples of 6 men were submitted to the crime lab for comparison to the unknown male DNA profile. Then on the 15th of September 2020, it was determined that the unknown DNA profile was linked to that of Matt. With the elimination of the other known DNA samples, the authorities determined that only Matt Kennedy, one other male individual, could have had contact with Kimberly on the night of the attack. On the 7th of October 2020, after submitting additional items of evidence for DNA testing, police discovered additional DNA was found on a second item in a location the suspect likely would have touched during the assault of Kim. DNA results led to the elimination of a second male subject, leaving Kennedy as the remaining suspect. On the 16th of October 2020, the authorities arrested 52-year-old Matt Kennedy in connection with slaughtering Kim. At the time of his arrest, he was a resident of Fairfield, Montana, but was living in Council Bluffs at the time of the attack. On the 18th of December 2020, he pleaded not guilty in court. His next appearance will be on the 2nd of February 2021. He's currently being held in the Potawatomi County Jail on a $1 million bond.